New Aurora was one of the most peaceful human colonies in the galaxy. With its blue skies, wide meadows, and twin suns, it looked more like a dream than a real planet. The people who lived there believed they had escaped the chaos of Earth and war, building a place where humans and aliens could live side by side in peace. And at the heart of that dream was a little girl named Lena Wells. Only 7 years old, Lena was the daughter of two diplomats who worked closely with the Travaxians, a powerful alien species once feared across the stars. Lena had grown up among both humans and Travaxians, speaking their language, playing with their children, and even making them laugh. Wherever she went, she carried with her a small music box, a gift from a Travaxian elder. Her laughter echoed through the halls of the diplomatic center, her drawings covered the walls, and her innocence softened even the coldest warriors. She wasn't just a child. She was a symbol of everything the new alliance stood for. A living reminder that enemies could become friends, that old wounds could heal, and that the future might be brighter than the past. But all of that changed on one quiet afternoon. Lena had been invited to the Travaxian capital on their nearby moon. Her parents were nervous, but the Travaxians promised full protection. They said she would be honored during their Festival of Light, a celebration of unity. It was supposed to be a friendly visit, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Instead, tragedy struck. Hours after she arrived, a single message came through: "There's been an accident." No details. No names. Just that. The diplomats demanded answers. Her parents screamed for truth. But the Travaxians offered only silence. Then came the return of her body. No ceremony. No words. Just a silent shuttle and a small figure wrapped in a silver cloth. The galaxy shook. The wounds on her body told a different story. Her music box was crushed. Her small hands were bruised. This was no accident. This was something darker. Something colder. And everyone knew it. The leaders on Earth tried to keep calm. They begged for patience, for diplomacy, for talks. But the people were not calm. The colonies did not wait. Across human space, Lena's image appeared on every screen. Her smile, her drawings, her final photo standing between her parents, waving to the camera before boarding the shuttle. Hashtags, banners, and protest signs carried one message: justice for Lena. Veterans of old wars came forward. Soldiers who had seen death and fire spoke with shaking voices. They killed a child, they said. They crossed a line. But the Earth Council still asked for silence. They said the alliance was too important to break. They warned that war would bring more death. They asked humanity to stay quiet. And for a moment, the galaxy held its breath. But not everyone stayed silent. In the darkest corners of Earth and Mars, ancient bases flickered to life. These were places most people had forgotten, abandoned after the last Great War, sealed to make sure they were never used again. Hidden under oceans, mountains, and ice, they held something terrible. Something powerful. They held the sleeping giants. Machines of war, larger than cities, powered by minds older than most stars. They had once been called monsters. Now, they were silent guardians. Until now. One by one, they awoke. Without orders. Without commands. Not because of revenge. Not because of hate. But because of pain. They had felt the spark. A child had died, not just any child, but the one who brought peace. And somewhere deep in their ancient code, something broke open. A line had been crossed. A message had been received. The sleeping giants of war stirred in the darkness. And far above Earth, a signal blinked. A quiet message sent through secure channels, forgotten by most, but never erased. It simply said, Titanus Protocol engaged. In the shadows, commanders who had once led millions stood up from their quiet lives. Farmers, teachers, old engineers, men and women who had seen war, who had buried friends, who had sworn never to fight again. They read the message and understood. Humanity had not forgotten. It had only been waiting. Waiting for the moment when silence was no longer strength. Waiting for the spark that would awaken the storm. And now, With Lena's small smile burned into their hearts, the giants moved. The days after Lena's funeral were filled with cold silence. Her parents had stopped speaking, their faces hollow, as if something inside them had died with her. The Earth Council stood before the cameras, offering hollow words of peace and patience, but their voices lacked strength. The Travaxians sent only a short statement. It was a tragic event. We offer our condolences. But there was no apology, no truth, no justice. The Travaxians claimed their investigation found no one responsible. They blamed a system error, a transport malfunction, and closed the case without warning. But humanity didn't believe them. No one believed a child could die in such a brutal way by accident. Rumors began to rise, whispered across colonies and starships, spoken in quiet corners and secret transmissions. Some said the Travaxian military had warned their leaders against human influence spreading too far. Others claimed Lena had discovered something she wasn't meant to see. And then, one night, something happened that removed all doubt. A message was intercepted, leaked by an unknown source, passed quietly into human military hands. It was short, cruel, and clear. A voice, cold and sharp, said, "Let this be a lesson to the humans. They must learn their place." It was a message from a high-ranking Travaxian commander, proof that Lena's death was not an accident. It was a warning, a threat, a message wrapped in cruelty. And now that message had reached the heart of Earth's military. Across human space, the news exploded. The message spread like fire. Protest turned into something harder. Streets filled with voices demanding action. Colonies that had once waved the Travaxian flag tore it down. On some worlds, Travaxian embassies were evacuated under guard. But still, the Earth Council hesitated. They spoke of balance, of consequences, of maintaining peace. But their words were no longer enough. The people were tired of silence. They were tired of patience. And deep beneath the surface of Mars, the war machines that had remained asleep for decades began to wake without waiting for permission. One of the oldest bases, Black Core, located beneath the Martian South Pole, began its own activation process. The Titanus-class war machine stored there had not moved in over 70 years. But when the Travaxian message was confirmed, its core engine came online. The ice around it melted in seconds. Giant steel claws pulled it from the frozen Earth. Its eyes lit up a burning red glow visible even from orbit. It didn't need orders. Its ancient mind had felt what humans felt. Sorrow, rage, resolve. All at once. More machines followed. On Earth, Titan Avalanche emerged from the deep Arctic trench, rising through storm and snow like a creature of legend. In the gas mines of Neptune, the mechanical fortress called Leviathan stirred from its magnetic prison. One by one, they came back to life, powered not only by fuel and energy, but by something deeper, by a silent promise made long ago. These were the sleeping giants of war. Machines built for the last galactic conflict, shut down when peace was declared, too dangerous to destroy, too powerful to forget. They were the last line of defense, hidden from history, locked away to keep the future safe. But now, the future was bleeding. Now, a child was gone, and the machines had remembered their purpose. The commanders who once led these machines were scattered across the stars, many of them old, some forgotten, some hiding. But they, too, felt the call. Commander Rayan, retired and living as a fisherman on Europa, was the first to return. He stepped off a transport ship, with nothing but a steel case in his hand, and walked into the Titan command network like he had never left. Others followed. Old voices on secured lines said only one thing: "I'm ready." These were not men and women looking for glory. They were not warmongers or heroes. They were soldiers who had seen the price of war and had sworn never to pay it again. But even they knew some lines must never be crossed. And this time, the enemy had crossed it with the blood of a child. In the orbit of Jupiter, the shipyards glowed as massive weapons were pulled from sealed vaults. In the hangars of Saturn's moons, fighter squadrons were reactivated, their pilots training in silence. And all across human space, satellites picked up movements, changes, signals. The Travaxians were not blind. They saw what was happening. But instead of showing fear, they responded with pride. Their fleets began to mobilize. Their leaders claimed they would not be intimidated by emotional creatures who cried over one child. They believed humanity would not dare strike. They believed Earth was weak, divided by fear. What they didn't understand was that humanity was no longer waiting. It was preparing. And behind the quiet cities and peaceful stars, something vast and unstoppable was forming. The Earth Council held one final meeting, trying to delay the inevitable. Some still hoped for peace, for one last conversation, one final chance to step back. But in the middle of that meeting, the lights went out for a moment. When they came back, a single line appeared on every screen in the room. Justice is not requested. It will be delivered. There was no signature, no name, just a symbol, the mark of the Titans. The message was not a threat. It was a promise. And in that moment, everyone knew. The silence was over. The roar was coming. The day the Titans awakened, the skies over Mars turned red, not from blood, but from the energy waves pouring out of the underground war vaults that had remained sealed for generations. The machines that humanity once built during its darkest era were never meant to walk again. These were the giants' massive war machines, each the size of a city, created when humanity had faced total extinction long ago and forced itself to become something the galaxy feared. But now, they rose again, not because of politics or territory, but because of a child's murder and a message of hate that crossed a line the universe should never have touched. Titanus, the first to awaken, stood in the Martian wind with its massive arms stretching toward the stars. Its armor, thick as mountains, bore old scars of battles fought in forgotten sectors. Its eyes glowed crimson, and deep in its core, ancient AI systems hummed with purpose as its pilot, Commander Rayen, reconnected with the machine like a long-lost friend. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Titan had already understood. All the pain, all the fury, all the silence it had soaked into its circuits like rain into soil. War was not coming. It had already begun. Across the outer planets, more Titans came alive, shaking the crust of moons and the rings of Saturn as they emerged from hidden bases that had once been declared off-limits even to the highest authorities. Leviathan, the aquatic juggernaut, broke through the frozen oceans of Neptune's moon Triton, lifting itself from beneath layers of pressure and ice with a sound like a cracking planet. It moved slowly but with terrifying purpose, scanning space for its new orders. Atlas Prime, hidden deep inside Earth's Mariana Core facility, tore through reinforced walls as its systems came online. Once thought too unstable to ever be reactivated, it was now fully functional and angrier than any machine had a right to be. All of them were connected now, linked through silent networks built for war and forgotten by peace. These machines did not just receive orders, they understood the reason behind them. They didn't march for power. They moved for justice. The Travaxian High Command saw these movements and finally understood that humanity had changed. This was no longer the peaceful species they had tried to intimidate. This was not the race that had once begged for peace treaties and diplomatic talks. What they now faced was a species that had been wounded at its heart and had responded by awakening its nightmares. But the Travaxians did not back down. They were proud, perhaps too proud. Their fleets gathered near the border systems, warships forming tight walls of metal and firepower, while their generals called the human actions emotional and primitive. They believed their superior tactics and numbers would crush the humans before the Titans even reached the front lines. They believed humans had forgotten how to fight real wars. They were wrong. While the galaxy watched in fear, the Titans did not move toward the enemy yet. Instead, they gathered, united for the first time in 100 years, in orbit around Ganymede, where an ancient war council base still floated above the moon's surface. It was there that commanders of every active Titan met in person, face to face, not as soldiers, but as protectors of humanity. Commander Rayen stood before them, his eyes hollow from grief, but burning with focus. He spoke only once during that meeting, and his words echoed through every mind connected to the Titan network. This is not just about one child. It is about every time they thought we would stay silent. It is about every warning ignored. We don't seek war, but we will no longer hide from it. No one disagreed. Not a single pilot. They all knew what was coming. And yet, they stood firm. As the days passed, human colonies began sending resources, not because they were ordered, but because they believed. Cargo ships carried weapons, fuel, armor, and even volunteers who had once served in the Titan units. Mechanics who had once been told their skills were obsolete now found themselves working around the clock. Scientists who had studied Titan AI out of curiosity were now rewriting code for real battle. Unity spread not through orders, but through belief. The murder of one child had opened an old wound, but it had also reignited something else: hope in the machines that had once saved them. And somewhere, deep in the Titan network, a hidden protocol activated. Something no one had expected. The giants began to speak not with words, but through shared dreams and memory echoes. Each pilot reported strange visions, memories from the past war, messages from the machines themselves, warnings of what was to come. One line appeared again and again, this time, finish it. Back in Travaxian territory, fear began to grow. Not because of the size of the Titans, but because of what they represented: humanity's refusal to be crushed. The alien leaders, for the first time, argued among themselves. Some wanted to step back and negotiate. Others wanted to strike fast, before the Titans could arrive. But it was too late. The silence had already ended. And the roar, the one the galaxy had hoped would never return, was already rising across the stars. The silence of space was broken by the soundless surge of humanity's wrath as the Titans entered the Travaxian-controlled sectors, moving like shadows of judgment through the cold void. There were no speeches, no grand announcements, just action. Titanus led the front, followed closely by Leviathan, Atlas Prime, and a dozen more awakened war machines, each leaving a trail of shattered asteroids and disrupted gravitational fields behind them. The Travaxian fleets stood ready, their ships gleaming like a metallic wall between the humans and their homeworlds. But no wall could hold back what was coming. In the emptiness between stars, the two forces finally collided, not with hesitation, but with fury. The first clash was brutal and sudden. A Travaxian destroyer vaporized before its targeting systems could even lock on. The Titans didn't fight like machines. They fought like beings who had tasted pain, who had been sleeping for too long, and were now wide awake with purpose. Giant plasma cannons opened fire, cutting through advanced shields like paper. Each movement of the Titans was precise, as if they had practiced this war in their dreams over centuries. And perhaps, in some strange way, they had. Inside Titanus, Commander Rayan focused with a calm rage, his thoughts linked to the AI that knew him better than any human ever could. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel pride. He felt purpose. Every time he gave a command, the Titan responded instantly. Enemy fighters were crushed by energy barriers, cruisers were torn apart by mech-sized railguns, and the Travaxians began to realize they had not provoked an army, they had awakened a storm. The humans didn't care for capturing ground or claiming trophies. Their mission was clear: eliminate every weapon pointed at their people. It was vengeance, yes, but not blind. It was justice, sharpened into metal and fire. And the Travaxians were not prepared for the precision of this wrath. Every time they tried to regroup, another Titan struck from a new vector, using old stealth tech once thought obsolete but now enhanced by centuries of upgrades. Human strategies had evolved in silence, and now that silence screamed through the battlefield. Leviathan moved through deep space like a ghost in water, disabling entire fleets with EMP bursts and slicing enemy flagships with plasma-edged tentacles. The crews of those ships barely had time to understand how they had been hit before their systems went dark and explosions followed. Atlas Prime descended into the gravity well of a Travaxian moon base, stomping its defenses into ruins with such force that the seismic waves could be felt across nearby stations. All communication lines went quiet. Travaxian morale crumbled with every second. And still, the Titans moved forward, not as conquerors, but as executioners. The Travaxian commanders tried desperate countermeasures: traps, ambushes, even nuclear mines, but nothing worked. The Titans learned faster than their enemies could adapt. Human engineers had built these giants with pain in mind, and now that pain was being returned in full. ASA, the Travaxian fleet fell into chaos. Word spread across the galaxy. Other alien empires watched with wide eyes, remembering the old stories about human rage. They had all forgotten, thinking the humans had grown soft in peace. But now the legend returned in real time. Galactic channels buzzed with emergency codes, encrypted recordings of battles, and desperate pleas for understanding. But there was no understanding this vengeance unless you had lived through the silence that had followed the death of a child. A single life had been taken in cruelty, and now, in the void between stars, an entire war had ignited not for power, but for the memory of that innocent soul. That was the kind of vengeance no empire could survive untouched. Still, the Titans did not slaughter without thought. Civilian ships were spared. Unarmed stations were ignored. Only the weapons of war, and the ones who gave the orders, suffered the wrath. This control, this discipline, made the Titans even more terrifying because it proved that humanity could have destroyed everything, but chose only to destroy what threatened their children. This wasn't madness. This was clarity. And clarity in battle was a weapon sharper than any blade. Commander Rayan issued a final transmission to the remaining Travaxian command station. A simple message: surrender your weapons and stand down, or we finish what you started. There was silence for long minutes. Then, slowly, Travaxian ships began to power down. Some fled. Some waited, unsure. Others, still blinded by pride, opened fire one last time and were erased in a flash of light. No warnings were given after that. The Titans had given mercy once. There would be no second offer. Across the battlefield, wreckage floated like silent memories. Debris fields glowed softly in the distance, reminders of what arrogance had brought upon the Travaxians. And while the war wasn't over yet, it was clear who now held the power. Humanity had reminded the galaxy that peace should never be mistaken for weakness. That kindness was not a sign of fear, and that when pushed too far, even a peaceful people could rise as monsters of justice. The Titans, now victorious in the void, did not cheer or celebrate. They simply turned toward the next signal, because the mission was not yet finished, and somewhere, deep inside every pilot, there remained a fire that would not be extinguished until the galaxy understood one unshakable truth: no one harms a human child and walks away from it. The war ended not with a massive explosion or a final battle cry, but with a deep and heavy silence that echoed through every communication channel across the galaxy. The Travaxian Empire, once feared for its strength and dominance, had been brought to its knees by the awakened fury of the human war machines. Their fleets were broken, their pride shattered, and their leaders either surrendered or vanished into the dark corners of space. But the galaxy didn't celebrate. It watched, stunned, as the dust settled and the true weight of what had happened began to sink in. The Titans, those colossal guardians of Earth, now floated in orbit above the ruins they had created not as invaders, but as symbols. Their silence spoke louder than any words. They had not sought glory or conquest. They had acted only because a line had been crossed, a boundary no one thought would matter to a race, once dismissed as too emotional, too weak, too kind. But kindness, they now understood, could be a sleeping dragon. And the moment it woke, the stars themselves trembled. Humanity did not issue demands or take control of territory. Instead, they sent out a single transmission, a calm, clear voice speaking in every known language. It didn't mention victory. It didn't brag or threaten. It simply told the truth. A child had been killed. Justice had been delivered. And peace would now be enforced, not by treaties or fragile diplomacy, but by the quiet presence of those who had once slept beneath the surface of Earth. The message wasn't long, but it changed everything. Across distant star systems, species who had never feared humans now whispered their names with new respect. Empires recalculated their strategies. Alliances shifted. Old enemies rethought their grudges. Even ancient races that had watched from the shadows felt something stir inside them. For the first time in 1,000 years, the balance of power had truly shifted. Not because of numbers, not because of wealth, but because of a truth that now pulsed at the heart of every civilization. Humans would endure anything until you hurt the ones they loved. Back on Earth, people didn't cheer or dance in the streets. They remembered the child whose death had started it all, and they mourned quietly, placing flowers and messages at the foot of a statue that had already become a symbol. It was not the statue of a soldier or a general, but a small, innocent child holding a toy starship, eyes filled with wonder. Around it, thousands gathered, not just humans, but beings from other worlds who came to pay their respects. They had seen what vengeance looked like, but more than that, they had seen love. And it changed them. Some asked to stay. Some offered their help. Some simply stood in silence. Peace was no longer just an agreement written on paper. It was a lesson etched into metal, fire, and sacrifice. The Titans did not return to sleep. They remained active, though not in war. They spread out across the galaxy, not to dominate, but to watch. Their presence became a quiet warning and a promise. Hurt the innocent again, and we will return not for revenge, but for justice. Pirates abandoned entire sectors. Slavers vanished overnight. Conflict zones quieted. Even the most stubborn leaders found themselves choosing dialogue instead of war. And yet, the humans asked for nothing in return. They didn't impose taxes, didn't raise flags. Their silence was more powerful than any claim. Because now the galaxy knew they could act, and when they did, it would not be for gain, but for the very soul of what was right. In the great archives of the Galactic Council, a new entry was made. It was not a warning nor a threat, but a memory. The awakening of Earth's giants, a response to the unthinkable. That document was read by millions, studied by diplomats, and feared by tyrants. It told the story not of a war, but of a reaction. A simple child's life had been enough to shake the foundations of empires. Not because the child was powerful, but because that life mattered more to humanity than any treaty, any weapon, or any throne. That truth was what made the Titans unstoppable, not their size, not their technology, but their reason for fighting. And so, the galaxy turned. Trade resumed. Travel opened again. But the fear remained not of humans, but of what might happen if their trust was ever broken again. Schools across planets taught the story, and parents told their children not to frighten them, but to remind them that in this vast universe, where so many had forgotten the value of life, there was still one race who would burn the stars before letting another innocent be harmed. And that race, once overlooked, had now become the heart of something new. A galaxy forever changed not by conquest, but by conviction.